We'll assume that producers, just like consumers, try to do the best they can given their circumstances. For consumers, the circumstances were described by the consumer's choice set, which in turn was formed by the consumer's income or the consumer's endowment and the prices that she faced. Together these created the set of bundles that the consumer could in fact afford and could therefore choose from. A producer's choice set is formed a little bit differently. In particular, the producer's choice set is the set of production plans that's technologically feasible. A production plan is just a bundle of inputs, a certain amount of labor, a certain amount of capital, combined with an output level, where the plan is to produce that output level with that input bundle. And just as not all bundles of goods are affordable for a consumer and are therefore not all part of the consumer's choice set, not all production plans are technologically feasible, and only those that are feasible are part of the producer's choice set. In this set of graphs here, we'll illustrate some producer choice sets for the case where there's only a single input, in our case, labor. We'll begin with a very simple producer choice set, one that is derived from a technology that says for any hour of labor that I hire, I'll always be able to get 4 units of output. We put labor hours on the horizontal axis and output, in this case packets of economist cards, on the vertical axis. And then for any hour that we hire, we go up by 4 because each hour can produce 4 packets of economist cards. We therefore get a line that has a slope of 4. Point A, for instance, is a production plan. It's a production plan that tells me I'm planning to use 10 labor hours to produce 40 packets of economist cards. The blue line is called the production frontier, and it tells me the most that I'll be able to produce with any number of labor hours. At the production plan B, for instance, I'm planning to use 20 labor hours to produce 80 economist cards, which is the most that I can get out of 20 hours, since the technology is such that the most I can get per hour is 4 economist cards. Even though it doesn't lie on the production frontier, point C is also a technologically feasible production plan. At that point, I'm planning to use 20 labor hours to produce 40 packets of economist cards. And since I'd be able to produce as many as 80 with 20 hours of labor, I can certainly produce 40. At the production plan C, I'm therefore not fully utilizing the labor force I've hired, but it is possible to implement production plan C. For this reason, we're shading all the production plans that lie underneath the production frontier, because all those production plans are in fact part of the producer choice set, because they are technologically feasible. It's just that if the production plan doesn't lie on the frontier, if it lies below, it simply means we're not using the labor force to its fullest extent. The production frontier is then analogous to the budget line for consumers. Along the budget line, the consumer spends all of her income, but she can also choose bundles that lie inside her choice set and not on the budget line, except that those bundles she would leave some money on the table. She wouldn't be spending all of it. Similarly, the producer, if he chooses a production plan that lies inside the frontier, he's not utilizing all the labor he has hired effectively. The production plan E is another plan that lies on the frontier and therefore utilizes all of the labor that's hired, in this case 30 hours of labor, to produce 120 packets of economist cards. At the production plan D, on the other hand, we're planning to hire 20 hours of labor to produce 120 economist cards. But we know that it would take 30 hours of labor, even if we fully utilized all the labor we hire, to produce that many economist cards. So we know it can't be possible to do so with 20 hours of labor. The production plan D is therefore not technologically feasible, and we can see that because of the fact that it lies outside of the producer choice set, or above the production frontier. It's analogous to consumption bundles that lie above the budget line and are therefore not affordable to a consumer. One difference with the consumer choice set, however, is that the producer choice set usually doesn't end. In other words, it's usually possible to produce more if you hire enough inputs. You can produce 400 economist cards if you hire 100 hours of labor, and even beyond that if you want to produce more. But the real world is usually a little bit more complex than the production frontier in panel A would suggest. If we have a certain amount of factory space, it probably isn't the case that we can keep hiring more and more workers and expect each additional worker to always produce 4 additional packets of economist cards per hour. At some point they're going to start running into each other. The factory space will get crowded, and we won't be able to get as much per worker as we got for the initial workers we hired. In panel B, we therefore show a more common shape for the production frontier. Notice that this shape initially gets steeper and steeper, and eventually gets shallower and shallower. Again, just as in panel A, all the production plans underneath the production frontier are also technologically feasible and are therefore shaded. Because this frontier starts out shallow, we actually don't get a whole lot out of the initial workers that we hire onto our factory space. The production plan A prime here indicates that the first 10 hours of labor that we hire only produce 10 economist packets. The production plan B prime, on the other hand, tells me that with 20 labor hours I can produce as many as 38 packets of economist cards. Thus, the second 10 labor hours that I hired increased my production by 28 packets, whereas the first 10 only increased it by 10. I can do even better with the next 10 labor hours that I hire. At production plan C prime, I can use 30 labor hours to produce as many as 82 packets of economist cards. That's 44 more than I could produce with just 20 labor hours. And at H prime, I can produce 56 more economist packets with the next 10 labor hours, for a total of 138, using 40 hours of labor. The point here is that if we have a given factory space, I can probably get increased production per worker as I hire the initial workers, because I can get the workers to specialize on different machines and remain on different parts of the factory floor rather than running all over the place. So initially it actually gets easier and easier to produce more economist cards as I hire more workers. But at some point the additional kick in productivity that I'll get from hiring additional workers that can increase specialization on the factory floor will start to slow down. At the production plan G prime, I can produce 200 economist packets with 50 workers. That's 62 more than I could produce with just 40 workers. And so I'm still getting additional productivity by hiring more workers, because for the previous 10 I only got an additional output of 56 cards. But the process is beginning to slow down. At the production plan E prime, I can get 262 packets of economist cards with 60 hours of labor. That's 62 more than I could get with 50 hours of labor, which in turn got me 62 more than I could get with 40 hours of labor. The additional output that I get per 10 hours of additional workers has therefore now fully leveled off. The production plan D prime then tells me that the next 10 hours of labor will get me an additional 56 economist card packets, increasing my production from 262 to 318. Thus, for these 10 worker hours, I'm getting 56 additional packets of cards, whereas for the previous 10, I got 62 additional packets. Therefore, the additional amount that I get from hiring additional worker is now diminishing. And for the next 10 workers, the output goes from 318 to 362, increasing by only 44. The process continues as we hire more workers because the production frontier becomes shallower and shallower. This increasing shallowness of the production frontier arises because it's getting harder and harder to produce additional economist cards by hiring additional workers with our limited factory space. This shape of the production frontier, one that starts shallow, becomes steeper and steeper, and eventually becomes shallower and shallower, is therefore one that makes a great deal of intuitive sense as we think about hiring additional inputs with some input like factory space fixed. It tells us that there's a limit to how much we can produce with some fixed input like factory space by just hiring more additional workers. Initially it gets easier and easier to produce because workers can specialize, but eventually it gets harder and harder to produce because workers have no place to go.